Off.
Can you close the windows there?
So we're cut for the moment?
Well,
We're not.
Okay.
Hang on one
okay,
second.
so I want to go back, because I want to, like, the one that stands out a little more strongly is when, well, two, but, so, we had an experience where, David wanted the heat turned up in the house. And, I said, well, why don't you put on some clothes? And then he said, well, I don't want to put on clothes. Or he said something like, well, and I don't remember details now, but something about, it's still cold, or I can't live, when the heat's not on, and I'll pay for heat. And for me, it was like, there was reasons why there's more than one reason why I didn't want the heat turned on. And he would ask me why, and then I would start answering. My first response, he said, why don't you want the heat turned on? And I said, well, because I'm not cold. And I was just about to say some other things to add on to that, and he just got extremely angry and started yelling, like, you think that my needs aren't important. So he didn't give me any space to fully answer. Had he, we would have not had an argument, because I would have said several things, and I was like thinking, okay, well, how can we work it out so he feels warm, and and I'm not feeling hot, or like that. How could we work it out? Like I wasn't like saying your needs don't matter, but that's how he heard it.
Okay. Is that accurate? Is that your accurate memory of it in general?
The broadest strokes of it match, not the detail. It was an argument about the heat, and she did say, I'm not cold.
Do you imagine that it's possible that you got triggered and didn't? Do you imagine the possibility, and it's not a rhetorical question, do you imagine within your memory that you got triggered and you got into a space that didn't allow her to complete her thought, and that if she had completed her thought, perhaps your need for warmth would have been taken into consideration?
That's a possibility.
Okay.
Yeah, I definitely was upset, and I definitely got upset quickly when I met with her resistance to having the kind of conversation I wanted to have about meeting both of our needs. So after I started getting upset, I would say that I wasn't able to listen as fully to her, and she might have been more able to move into a more mutual conversation if I had been more able to listen to her more fully.
Thank you. I mean, that's
true.
That's
That's
really
all
beautiful.
accurate.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just kind of NVC 101 for us all to remember is that
it's true.
what happens is somebody says something.
Right.
We get triggered.
Yes.
We then escalate, and then they get triggered and they escalate, and the next thing we know, remember I was talking about Edith,
That's
when
right.
Yeah.
her family broke up over pancakes.
That's right. That's it.
And that's, I think, what happened. This was pancakes, and you both
That's it.
escalated.
That's
and
it. Yeah.
God, whatever we can do to try, and even though we notice we're getting triggered and escalated, to breathe through it, and whatever we can do to not say or even have the tone that will then trigger the other one, but to even just say, I'm feeling, like we talked about, I'm feeling triggered. Can you slow down, or can I breathe, or can we just slow this down a little bit before we escalate into
Right.
a bigger thing?
I can see that I must have said things to her at the early part of that conversation that I know to be things that she is sometimes triggered by. They weren't inflammatory things, but she sometimes is triggered by my style of information gathering, or trying to have what I see as rational, mutual, win-win dialogue about something, what I call fighting fair, or having a creative conflict, understanding that there's a conflict here. You want one thing, I want another. That's part of life, And what we can do is be constructive and have a creative conflict, have a fair talking, listening dialogue about something we're experiencing a conflict around. I think I experience you sometimes as being simply averse to having that, and I get really angry at that. So I think by suggesting that we should have a dialogue like that, I think in itself might have triggered you by insisting on it, actually.
You know, I think my guess is that it's really just a cultural difference between you two. Some
It's not. It won't
Let me-
stand.
let me say what
it's
I
a,
mean.
it's actually. I don't care where it comes from. It's a bottom line for me.
Okay, but if I can just reflect what I mean by
Okay.
a cultural difference.
Okay.
There are some families that the culture includes being very passionate.
Uh-huh.
To the family, it's passionate. To a different culture, it's fighting. Within
Right.
some family culture, fighting is okay. We fight. That's what we do. We get strong that way. We are passionate. It's
I actually didn't have that in my immediate family, although it certainly is in my larger extended family and in
Mhm.
my genetic
Mhm.
makeup
Right.
as a Jewish person.
Right.
Okay. I understand that Karen has history of anger and abusive behaviors in her immediate family. So I understand how it could be that me insisting on something with passion could be perceived as something that's threatening in a way that I don't mean it to be emotionally. And I do understand that. It's one of the things that makes me, I really care about you in just that way, that you have those edges, those are some of your sore spots, and I love to help you and see you grow in those ways. It makes me question whether we can really be compatible, because there's too many things I do that I experience as too intensely triggering for you, and then I get a lot of anger and focused on me. That seems disproportionate to what my real motivation is and how I'm interacting with you.
How does that sound to you? Does that sound like an accurate observation of the dynamic?
Somewhat, yeah. The part where David said that I'm averse to working it out, basically. This is exactly where I think it's our hugest issue.
Right. So let's just acknowledge that's an interpretation. It's your interpretation. You're telling yourself she's averse to working it out.
My experience is that when I try to work it out, oftentimes, whether it's the way in which I bring it up or the fact that I want to dialogue and include showing her my different perspective to hers and having us talk about it and negotiate and have a dialogue. Sometimes I experience you as really resisting that process. And when I experience what I believe to be in that moment, you resisting the process, I get more intent to try to call you to do that with me in a way that you may experience as threatening, and you may experience it as violent. It's not my intent, and it's not my experience of myself until it gets really escalated for both of us that it's actually violent. But it can be passionate. And then you tend to shut the drawbridge and just say, the problem is now your mood. And that's why I'm not talking to you. And I'm saying the reason for my mood is you're not talking, you're not playing fair, you're not dialoguing about this thing that we both have needs invested in.